אם כך, ירושלים תארח כבר במוצאי שבת את מכבי ראשון לציון. חיפה תרצה להנחיל.
The Atlantic Ocean. The forgotten war zone for one of the most bitterly fought battles of World War II.
And just at that moment, there was the most unholy bang.
German U-boats attacked British and Canadian supply convoys.
The Atlantic was our lifeline. Make no mistake.
Without vital supplies, Britain will fall. Hitler will win the war in Europe. It's a battle of strategy, of punch and counter-punch.
When these depth charges explode, it's a feeling of sheer terror.
A race to develop technological supremacy, or get Lady Luck on their side.
You just hope that other people would be in the water and you would survive.
This is the Battle of the Atlantic. At stake, the outcome of World War II. The German U-boat will become one of the most feared weapons of World War II. The day before war is declared, U-30 runs off the northwest coast of Ireland. On board, 11 torpedoes and 44 crew ready for the hunt.
We had sworn allegiance to our fatherland and our military. It was 21 years since the First World War, and now it was our turn to fight.
That same day, the liner Athenia leaves Britain bound for Canada. Many of the 1,100 passengers on board are fleeing Hitler's invasion of Eastern Europe. Among them, Jewish refugees Marianne Young and her husband.
We fled the Czech Republic a week after the Nazis had taken over, and we decided we did not want to stay in Europe. I knew that the war was going to break out sooner or later, but I didn't think it was going to break out right then.
On September the 3rd, 1939, Britain and France declare war on Germany.
I was resting on my bunk and a colleague came in and shook me awake. And he said, "Guess what? The English declared war on us." I jumped up and went to the radio room and tried to hear what I could. We were told to treat England as an enemy immediately.
At 4:30 p.m., with the war just 5 hours old, U-30 spots a ship some 400 kilometers northwest of Ireland. The commander, Fritz Julius Lemp, is too far away to make out whether it's a warship or not.
From the way the ship was heading, we could tell it was going from England to America or Canada. We followed the ship until dusk because the commander wanted to be sure he made no mistake.
But seeing the ship blacked out, Lemp assumes the Athenia is an armed merchant cruiser and goes in for the kill.
When it was dark, we attacked the ship. The first attack was with 2 torpedoes.
Los!
Torpedoes travel at a top speed of 23 meters per second.
We were just starting to be served in the dining room. My husband was with me and his brother and I. We are sitting at the table, and I remember very well we had soup or something. And suddenly there was an explosion. It was black, and there was chaos.
Ich lief dann zum Funkraum und
I ran into the wireless room and heard the Athenia call sign and the SOS. They had 1,100 passengers on board. Oh my God. Then suddenly I realized what we had done.
Commander Lemp knows he's made a tragic error.
I climbed over the railing, I held the hand of my husband and said, "Come on." And he kept on shouting, "Children and women first." The lifeboat was slowly lowered and I lost the sight of him. And I was thinking, oh my God, while the ship is sinking and my husband is on the ship. It was just dreadful.
Marianne spends a long night in a lifeboat before being rescued. Athenia is the first U-boat casualty of World War II. The sinking claims the lives of 118 men, women and children. Returning to Scotland, Marianne searches for her husband.
And I looked at the list of survivors and I found him there. I cannot tell you. It was like God had blessed me.
The sinking is a perfect demonstration of the destructive power of this deadly weapon. But a propaganda disaster. U-30 returns in disgrace. What happens next breaks all international naval regulations.
und als wir dann in Wilhelmshaven
At Wilhelmshaven, a group of officers came on board.
Kommission oder auf jeden Fall dann wurden wir im
We were called to the torpedo room and told to say nothing about what had happened.
auszusagen über die Geschichte, der ganze Vorgang.
The log record of the sinking of Athenia was deleted.
The Germans want no record to show they were to blame, especially as 28 Americans are among the dead. The United States is still neutral. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels claims that Churchill deliberately sunk the Athenia to bring America onto the Allies' side.
In the First World War, the sinking of the Lusitania, a similar case, had brought the United States almost into the war. And that was something Hitler tried to avoid.
In America, the newsreels report the sinking as an outrage. Winston Churchill waits to see what the Americans will do.
There's no question that Churchill would have been pleased, even relieved. What he wanted to see was the United States enter the war against Germany.
But in America, after World War I, there's no appetite for getting involved in another European war. America stays neutral.
It wasn't just Europe that was traumatized by the bloodshed of the First World War, so were the Americans. And there was a reluctance on their part to get involved in another trench war bloodbath.
With Europe rapidly falling to the advancing German army, Britain will soon be cut off. The situation is critical. The country has just 3 weeks left of some of the basic supplies she needs to survive. With no help from America, Britain looks to Canada. The sleepy Nova Scotian ports of Halifax and Sydney suddenly find themselves the hub of one of the largest supply operations the world has ever seen. For Canadians, then subjects of the British Empire, there is no question about coming to Britain's aid.
As far as I was concerned, it was just an automatic reaction. The British Prime Minister declared war, and that, to me, meant that Canada went along.
4,500 kilometers of ocean separate Britain and Canada. Perfect U-boat hunting ground. But Britain is confident that the Royal Navy, the most powerful in the world, will easily protect the supply ships. It has not reckoned on the ruthless drive and ability of one man. In Germany, commander of the submarines, Karl Dönitz, makes plans to take on the Royal Navy and win. During World War I, Dönitz commanded a U-boat. Sunk by the British and captured, he is driven by a thirst for revenge. Dönitz writes in his memoirs,
"I believe in the fighting powers of the U-boat. A first-class offensive weapon in naval warfare and the best possible torpedo carrier.
Before the war, Dönitz personally oversees the construction of the U-boat fleet. Germany is banned from building submarines after World War I, but continues to develop them in secret. Dönitz rapidly creates a powerful modern submarine force. The workhorse of this fleet is the Type 7 U-boat. Twin diesel engines give it a speed of 16 knots on the surface, fast enough to keep up with most cargo ships. And electric batteries allow it to stay submerged for up to 24 hours. It's equipped with an 88mm gun, but the deadliest armament is its 11 torpedoes. Later, Winston Churchill will write, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." In the early months of World War II, German U-boat commander Dönitz orders his U-boats to scour the Atlantic for targets. But the Royal Navy dismisses the threat. It's confident that an inherent weakness of the submarine will prove its downfall. U-boats can only travel underwater for short periods before they must surface to recharge their batteries. Here, they can be easily spotted and destroyed. And when they are submerged, the Royal Navy has complete faith in a new anti-submarine technology called ASDIC. Developed before the war, it uses directional sound waves to see underwater. These bounce off submarines and are heard back as an echo. The quicker the return of the echo, the nearer the ship is to the submarine. When the distance is closed, depth charges can be launched. Demonstrations of this early type of sonar so impressed Churchill that he boasts, "This relieves us of our great danger." Within a fortnight at the start of the war, 3 aircraft carriers and 14 destroyers equipped with ASDIC sonar are dispatched to flush out the U-boats. One of the carriers is HMS Courageous. With 48 aircraft and a top speed of 31 knots, she is one of the most important ships in the Royal Navy. On board is John Cannon.
A fortnight after the war started, we were patrolling off the southwest coast of Ireland with an escort of 4 destroyers. Very, very powerful unit. It was just a normal day, nothing would miss. The pilots were in the air practicing landing and taking off, and also a certain amount of patrolling.
But the sonar has a serious flaw. Its range cannot match that of a torpedo. Outside the detection zone lurks U-29. Its commander is Otto Schuhart. He spots Courageous turning for aircraft to land. He seizes the opportunity and sends 3 torpedoes speeding towards the carrier.
Los!
I remember looking at my watch. It's 4 minutes to 8. And just at that moment, there was the most unholy bang.
Los!
Seconds later, another tremendous bang when the second torpedo hit us.
The torpedoes blow 2 big holes in Courageous. The carrier is doomed.
I made my way up onto the upper deck, and I could see men were already jumping into the water. I slid down the starboard side of the Courageous, dived into the water, and struck out as fast as I could to get away from the ship. And at that time, I saw the carrier settling in the sea. She went down, the sea folded over her like a shroud, and she was gone. Not long after that, everything went silent, but you could hear men thrashing around in the water. The 2 destroyers that were still with us, they couldn't stop to pick up survivors, because if they stopped, they could possibly have been vulnerable themselves.
In fact, the destroyer HMS Ivanhoe is in hot pursuit of Otto Schuhart, using its underwater sonar. The destroyer detects the characteristic sonar pingback from U-29. Schuhart makes an emergency dive to the greatest depth he has ever gone.
Being down there, even without enemy attacks, is not a very comfortable feeling. One sort of hopes one can get higher as soon as possible without any endangering the boat.
The attack lasts for several hours, until both destroyers have exhausted their charges. But Schuhart's luck holds, and he's able to escape. Back on the surface, John Cannon has been in the water for 2 hours. His only hope now of rescue is to reach a passing merchant ship.
So I struck out for the Dido, and I'd been swimming for quite a long, long time. And I was getting very, very tired, very tired. And very strangely, and I don't know if people will understand this, but drowning wasn't a fear. I felt so tired, I just wanted to go to sleep. But swimming alongside of me was a fleet-armed observer, and he must have thought that I'd given up, and he suddenly shouted at me, come on, boy, keep going, your mother and father will be waiting for you when you get home." And believe you me, it put a little bit more life in me, and I set out again, and I kept going again, and I kept going.
John survives, but of the 1,260 crew, 518 are lost. With just 2 torpedoes, a small U-boat has destroyed one of the most important ships in the British fleet. The Royal Navy has badly underestimated the U-boat threat. The consequence is devastating. To avoid further losses, the entire British fleet of 6 carriers is restricted to operations where there's no risk of U-boat attack.
We weren't prepared. At the time, I don't think it had sunk in that we were in such a dangerous position.
Otto Schuhart receives a hero's welcome on his return to port. Dönitz is delighted with the U-boat commander. The attack is proof U-boats can defeat the Royal Navy. Just 4 weeks after the sinking of HMS Courageous comes an attack of breathtaking audacity. U-boat commander Gunther Prien slips into the heavily guarded home base of the Royal Navy at Scapa Flow. Maneuvering his U-boat past anti-submarine defenses, he torpedoes the Royal Oak, a prize battleship with enormous 380mm guns, amongst the largest in the Royal Navy. In icy waters, she goes to the bottom in just 10 minutes, with the loss of more than 800 crew. Many drowned trying to escape through portholes. In Britain, the sinking of the Royal Oak is a national disaster. Even Winston Churchill concedes that the raid has been a remarkable exploit of professional skill and daring.
Sinking a warship with a tiny U-boat, that's what you can call a gallant deed. So you can use this for propaganda.
In Germany, Prien becomes a national hero. Ecstatic crowds welcome him to Berlin. Hitler awards him one of Germany's highest decorations, the Knight's Cross. For Karl Dönitz, it's vindication that U-boats can win the war for Germany. But for the British, it's a wake-up call. To counter the German threat, they deploy a tactic successfully used against U-boats in World War I, convoys. In convoys, merchant ships are grouped in tight formation, guarded by a small number of armed escorts. The tactical advantages are enormous. Ships sailing alone cannot all be given protection. But in a convoy, large numbers can be defended by just a few warships. Hundreds of merchant ships are pressed into convoy service. They're crewed not by the military, but by civilian sailors. Britain draws these merchant seamen from all four corners of its empire.
At sea, everybody sticks together. Our ship had English and Arabs on it. And after that, we got Indian crew from India and Chinese crew from China.
I joined the Merchant Navy because I liked the adventure of going to sea. That was a big thing.
These volunteer seamen labor in all weathers to bring the vital supplies of fuel, machinery, and food to Britain.
I've seen a ship right on the top of a wave, and the stern, the propeller is going round out of the water, and then she had dropped right down, and all you can see is water all the way around you.
The spray and the spume would come up across the foredeck and would freeze in the rigging as it came up.
By Christmas 1939, the convoy system is working. U-boats pick off 110 ships sailing alone, but only 4 are lost to U-boats out of nearly 6,000 crossing in convoys. Dönitz grows increasingly frustrated at the lack of U-boat success. There's one major obstacle holding him back. He'd asked Hitler for 300 submarines, but he's got less than 60.
The major problem we face now is simply a lack of U-boats. We must try to locate the convoys and then mount a concentrated attack with every single U-boat we have.
Dönitz also faces another obstacle. The British control both the North Sea and the English Channel. To reach the Atlantic, his U-boats have to sail around the north of Britain. It adds an extra week to their journey and severely limits their operating range to just a few hundred kilometers off the coast of Ireland. But, once again, the tide of war is about to turn. In the late spring of 1940, Hitler's armies strike west into France. The British are forced into a humiliating retreat from Dunkirk. France surrenders.
fall of France just changes everything. At that point, all sense that this could somehow be a controlled, limited, if perhaps protracted, European war simply goes out the window. I mean, Britain really is pushed to the brink.
For Dönitz, it offers an incredible opportunity. The day after the surrender, he drives to Brittany on the French coast. Now his U-boats will have direct access to the Atlantic Ocean.
Germany is now a major Atlantic power with defensible Atlantic bases. German submarines are nearly a week closer to the main Atlantic shipping lanes. That greatly increases their time on station, their effectiveness.
Dönitz establishes a base in the port of Lorient and sets up his headquarters in an elegant villa overlooking the harbor. Construction starts on massive U-boat pens built out of heavily reinforced concrete up to 7 meters thick. Armored doors and gun platforms make them self-contained fortresses where the boats can be repaired and refueled. From these huge cathedrals of concrete, all ships in the North Atlantic are now within range of U-boat attack. And they've already been given permission from Berlin to pursue unrestricted submarine warfare.
Do not rescue any men. Weather conditions and proximity of land are of no consequence. Concern yourself only with the safety of your own boat. We must be hard in this war. The enemy started it in order to destroy us, and thus nothing else matters.
Now, no ship is safe. By 1940, with the German Luftwaffe blitzing British cities, some parents decide to send their children across the Atlantic to safety.
I was 11 years old, and my parents decided that because the war was getting close to Britain, that I would have the opportunity of going to America.
A year after war starts, Colin Ryder Richardson is one of 90 evacuee children leaving for Canada on the liner City of Benares. When the convoy reaches 800 kilometers northwest of Liverpool, their Royal Navy escort leaves it to meet another convoy, believing they're beyond the range of U-boats. On the 5th night into the journey, the children are told it's safe for them to sleep in their pajamas, rather than fully clothed with their life jackets on.
We were a bit nervous, but we were assured that we were safe and that we could relax.
At 3 minutes past 10, the city of Benares is hit by a torpedo, just below the children's quarters. In the chaos, Colin finds his way to the lifeboats.
We stood there as all the other children streamed out, mainly just wearing dressing gowns and slippers and teddy bears and things like that, and not realizing quite what was going to happen next.
The city of Benares is listing badly, making it difficult to launch lifeboats. Torpedoed 450 kilometers from Rockall, she had been sailing in an area previously thought safe from U-boat attack. But now ships across the Atlantic are within easy reach of the German U-boat bases on the French coast. One of the children on the ship, Colin Ryder Richardson, finds he is sharing a sinking lifeboat with the dead and dying.
We were all trying to do what seemed sensible at the time, was to dispose of the bodies outside the lifeboat.
After 20 hours in the water, Colin is rescued. Of the 90 children on board, 77 die.
It definitely haunts me, and there's probably not a day that goes past without seeing those children. I was one of the lucky ones to survive, mainly because of my life jacket.
Before sending him away, Colin's mother had bought him a life jacket.
And in this pocket, I had a belt and my mother's handkerchief, which I only discovered a few years ago when it came out before.
The sinking of the city of Benares shocks the world. The papers denounce it as a war crime. But for the British Navy, it brings a devastating realization. U-boats, now operating out of their French bases, can strike far out into the Atlantic and hunt convoys for longer. The Battle of the Atlantic has entered its most deadly phase. Convoys defended by warships are still the best protection against U-boat attack. Vice Admiral Dönitz must find a way to overcome their tactical strength. He decides on an audacious strategy. If it works, it will destroy the vital supply lines, which are all that are keeping Britain from collapse. He calls it Wolfpack. The Atlantic Ocean covers 77 million square kilometers. For the first part of his strategy, Dönitz strings out his U-boats in long lines to sweep the ocean. He stays in constant radio contact with the U-boats. So to avoid alerting the Allies, they use ingenious encoding equipment called Enigma.
As we got more submarines in the Atlantic, the order came from U-boat command that when we spotted a convoy, we had to report the sighting back to base and hold off from attacking.
Think of the U-boat pack as a pack of wolves or hounds, however you want to describe it, on a radio leash. Every U-boat has to report every day because the people who are actually tracking and positioning them back at U-boat headquarters need to know where they are because they're moving them around on a board.
When Dönitz gives the order, the U-boats are to attack. Not underwater, but on the surface, where they're faster and more maneuverable, and where they cannot be detected by sonar. The final masterstroke is to strike at night when it's almost impossible to make out the small, sleek outline. The test for Dönitz's strategy comes when convoy SC-7 starts its 17-day journey from Canada to Britain. 35 ships are loaded with steel and timber. But many in the convoy are old and slow. And Royal Navy resources are so stretched, there's only one small escort available. It's the perfect target for the Wolfpack. "11 days later, 2 more escorts join the convoy northwest of Ireland, the most dangerous part of the crossing. At midnight, U-48 spots the convoy. It relays its position back to Dönitz. Dönitz orders the waiting U-boats to converge on the convoy. They arrive 2 days later. A wolf pack of 5 U-boats goes in for the kill. On board the ship leading the convoy is Charles Gonsalves.
It was a moonlight night, and the U-boat commanders could see the silhouette of the ships, and that's when they really went to town.
The attack is led by ace commander Otto Kretschmer. He will sink 250,000 tons of shipping. His nickname, the Tonnage King.
The escorts are at their wits' end, shooting off star shells the whole time to comfort themselves and each other. Not that it makes much odds in the bright moonlight. I'm now beginning to pick ships off from astern of the convoy.
Typically, a U-boat commander would try and position his boat ahead of the convoy, which allows them to come to him. The Germans' best and most experienced U-boat commanders like to get inside the convoy and shoot from there. Very short-range stuff, not for the faint of heart.
All one saw was flashes and sounds of torpedoes striking ships, explosions.
Charles Gonzalez's ship is sunk by U-101.
I was thrown against the bulkhead. I saw a lot of people obviously dead. It's then that I started to think, this is a nasty business.
Back at his French base in Lorient, Dönitz follows events radioed in live by the U-boat commanders. Most of the U-boats only break off the attack when they run out of torpedoes. In just one night, some 20 ships are lost, more than half the convoy. Ships in convoy are instructed not to pick up the survivors. They cannot risk becoming targets themselves. Hundreds of merchant seamen fight for their lives in the North Atlantic.
There's no doubt the merchant navy was the lifeline to the country, and they couldn't let that lifeline get broken or destroyed. So at all costs, you had to save the ship and the cargo that was in it. The men in the water had to fight for themselves.
100 merchant seamen are lost on convoy SC7. And with 80,000 tons of supplies lost, it's one of the worst attacks in the entire Atlantic campaign. For Dönitz, it's a great victory and proves that his Wolfpack tactics work. After his ship sinks, Charles Gonzalez spends a long, cold night in the water before being picked up. To this day, he maintains that the Royal Navy could have done more to protect them.
There was a degree of complacency. If there wasn't, how come would you send one destroyer to protect a convoy of 35 ships?
The convoys desperately need more escorts to protect them from U-boat attack. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill turns to US President Franklin D. Roosevelt for help. But Roosevelt could do nothing. It's election year in America, and he knows that the American people don't want war. A year into the war, all Roosevelt can offer is 50 World War I destroyers. These aging ships are ill-equipped to cross the treacherous North Atlantic seas, let alone repel the U-boat Wolfpacks. 6 are delivered to Canada. Despite their limitations, they could prove a welcome addition.
In 1939, we had 6 destroyers, 4 minesweepers, and that's pretty much it.
The Canadian Navy's destroyers are verging on obsolescence. The ships that we have gotten from the Royal Navy are frankly second-hand hand-me-downs.
And it's not only the ships that the Canadians lack. They need sailors to man them.
It was not unusual for a ship, be it a destroyer or a corvette, to go to sea, as I said, with literally a large proportion of the crew never having been to sea in their lives.
Demand is so high, many recruits have only worked on the land.
A large percentage of seamen came from the prairies. Now, whether they'd never been to the ocean before, they'd never seen it. Now, maybe the waving wheat would look like an ocean or something like that.
The rawness of the RCN, the Royal Canadian Navy, does not go unnoticed by the British.
The British have developed a kind of concept of the RCN as bungling and incompetent. The Canadian Navy was derided very often in the Royal Navy as being the Royal Colliding Navy or the Royal Collision Navy.
The Royal Canadian Navy needs a complete overhaul if it's to play its part in the U-boat war. But what normally takes years of planning must now be achieved in months. Canada starts a massive expansion plan to provide escorts for the Atlantic convoys bringing vital supplies to Britain. There's only one type of ship that can be built fast enough and in large enough quantities. A corvette.
Anybody who could bend steel and drive a rivet really could build a corvette. So the idea was that you have a simple technology, a simple design, which you can mass produce, and you don't need a specialized shipyard to build it, and you don't need specialists in the sense of highly trained naval engineers to actually make it go once you get it in the water.
Churchill calls them the cheap and nasties. Cheap to build and nasty for the U-boats. Corvettes are fitted with a 100mm gun at the front and 2 depth-charge rails on the stern. These sturdy ships were originally designed to hunt whales. Their tried and tested steam engines are good at short sprints, useful too in catching U-boats. But their basic old-fashioned design is limited.
The original intent of the Corvette, in terms of its service, was pretty humble. These were going to be the kind of jacks of all trades inshore. No one expected these vessels ultimately to carry the burden of the war in the North Atlantic.
In rough, open seas, it's the crews who take the full force of the Corvette's unsuitability.
The bridge is completely open. It's like a great big bathtub. So you're getting it from the sea breaking over the front and from the weather pouring down from the top.
When the Corvettes get out to mid-ocean, they find that the weather is just too severe for them. They perform abysmally. People are often wet for days on end, sleeping in wet clothes, working in wet clothes. It's cold, and it's quite often frightening.
But for now, the Corvettes are the best hope to defeat Hitler's U-boats. And out in the Atlantic, they're soon locked in combat with the wolf packs. Peter Koch was in the convoy which saw the first decisive Canadian corvette U-boat action.
It usually takes 2 ships to kill a submarine, one to sit to one side and ping, and the other one to drop the depth charges. So you go looking for it, you do an Aztec sweep and see if you can pick up an echo.
While steaming to reinforce a stricken convoy, corvettes Chamblay and Moose Jaw detect a U-boat. Chamblay drops depth charges. U-501 surfaces. Spotting the U-boat, Moose Jaw alters course to ram the sub.
A really sharp action followed in which there was a kind of a glancing blow by Moose Jaw, and at that moment when the corvette and the submarine were actually alongside one another, the captain of the U-boat actually stepped from his conning tower onto the forecastle of Moose Jaw. And then the ships managed to separate. The U-boat's crew actually got control of the submarine again. And then a bit of a chase took place until ultimately the sub was rammed and sunk.
The U-boat commander and surviving crew of U-501 are taken prisoner. But the corvettes can never be more than a stopgap measure. Throughout the autumn of 1940, the wolf packs remorselessly pick off the convoy ships like sitting ducks. The situation is critical. Supplies of food to Britain have fallen to their lowest levels since the war began. All that stands between Britain and defeat are the heroic sacrifices being made by its volunteer seamen.
3-0, submarine. Commencing echo sweep, red.
Tom Cruise British on their very first ship only made about a few days' sail and they were sunk and dead, and they'd only been a few days in the service.
It is now more dangerous to be a merchant seaman than fight in any branch of the British or Canadian armed forces.
You begin to think that you're not frightened. It's not going to be you. It's going to be that man and that man and that man, but it's never going to be you.
You couldn't be fearful of anything, and you just hope that other people, not you, would be in the water and you would survive. That was it.
If there's a war on, you don't think you're going to lose. You've got to think you're going to win.
The final death toll of merchant seamen lost in the Battle of the Atlantic will reach more than 30,000.
The merchant sailors wouldn't go to sea, the ships wouldn't move, and the whole thing would fall apart. And it's quite a remarkable story. And they are the unsung heroes of the Atlantic War.
Dönitz Wolf Pack strategy is proving a stunning success. Hitler is persuaded to give him more U-boats. Now with a promised 29 new submarines a month, Dönitz is even more confident he can win the war for Germany. For Winston Churchill, the situation is bleak. Hitler's U-boats are close to starving Britain into submission.
What is to happen if so many of our merchant ships are sunk that we cannot bring in the food we need to nourish our brave people?
The British must find a countermeasure to destroy the submarine wolf packs, or face certain defeat. And soon they have a new technology, a new secret weapon they hope will do just that.